You're watching Bet Safe. We're talking Formula One. With me, as ever, is Mr. Johnny Herbert. We're going to be talking the Singapore Grand Prix, which is round 14. Before we do, we'll talk Monza. We'll talk record-breaking, ground-breaking, 69 poles for Mr. Hamilton, 59 career wins, and shall we say Italians weeping in their own backyard. Would it be fair to say he turned up at their party wearing lycra and still ended up with a girl?
Yes, he certainly did. Lewis did a cracking job, but you know that record you're talking about qualifying, I honestly didn't think I'd ever see it in my lifetime. I thought it was something with Michael having all those pole positions, it would never be bettered. But I think what's changed, of course, when Michael was racing, there was only 16 races. Now we're sort of 19, 20, possibly 25 in the future. So I suppose all those records are going to go like that. But you've still got to be able to achieve it. You've still got to be able to apply it when the pressure's on, in those tricky conditions we had in Monza, for example, where he again just drove an absolutely sort of perfect lap. And I think that's where the greats come into their own. And I think Monza was one of those. Once again, Lewis showed his skills, which is brilliant. But Ferrari overall, at their home race, the Tifosi really sort of, I think, turning up on the Sunday, thinking there was going to be a good sort of result for them after the difficulties they had in qualifying. Obviously, not getting the rain tyre to work. They're okay with the intermediate tyre, which was quite strange. And then as soon as they put the wet tyre on, which normally is actually bigger, because of obviously aquaplaning, so actually the ride height goes up. Now there seemed to be a little bit of, well, once that ride height got up, it went out of the window with the aerodynamics, and then they weren't actually able to get the qualifying lap in that they needed. Couldn't get anything to work, couldn't get the tyre to work, the aerodynamics weren't working either, so it was a little bit of sort of a lost cause, unfortunately, for them. But to be honest, I think the result they had in Spa was surprising, very, very good for them. Going to Monza, I think it was one of those, and actually it's the worst of the two. It's where you expect Mercedes to be the strongest because of their power unit works very, very well. The car is obviously good at the same time. So I think the gap was always going to be quite a big one. So I think damage limitation came for Ferrari when they got third. Would you expect them to be in third in Monza? Probably yes, because when Valtteri gets it together, and he did a good race to be honest, you're going to get a 1-2. From Mercedes. So I think actually damage limitation was done. I know Marchione came out from Ferrari and basically said sort of we cracked under the pressure and it was the worst result we could ever think of. Actually, I thought that was a good result for them at a track that I don't think realistically we expected them to do that well, just because of the way the track is, and it just goes more towards the Mercedes. But overall, it was a good weekend. I think it was great to see sort of the Red Bulls doing very well in qualifying, but of course then they got their penalties, crazy penalties we keep having, getting sent to the back, and Daniel Ricciardo did a cracking race once again as well. So overall, I think we had the result I think we expected at the front, and then further behind there were some nice surprises, especially with Red Bull at a track again you wouldn't have expected to do as well.
It has to be said, you did predict this because the home of Ferrari, it benefited the Mercedes, which you said it would do.
Yeah.
But in front of the Tifosi and the Scuderia's 70th anniversary, Hamilton just went boom.
Yeah, and as I said, I think it was pretty obvious in many respects. There's always a chance that maybe Mercedes won't quite get the car in the working window that they need, but I think at that type of track that is less likely to happen. Didn't happen, obviously. And Ferrari, I think maybe they had expectations by what Marchione had said from Ferrari. The president was expecting big things.
Well, he said it was embarrassing, didn't he?
He said it was embarrassing. Yes, this is where the expectations were right up here.
Yeah.
But were they genuinely, really?
Not where you were
expectations?
Concerned.
No, exactly. Were they going to be there? No, they weren't. They were going to be sort of a little bit lower down. That was the worst, personally, the worst weekend for their car that they have. So I think that it's not a surprise. And I think it was great actually. Again, as I said, the third place was damage limitations, and they can move on now into a better time for them with the coming races.
And the gap now that we've seen built up, is that going to be hard to gain back for Vettel?
No,
Ferrari?
no, I don't think so. I think we've always been talking about this season's going to be up and down, and I think that's exactly what we've seen once again. And yeah, the advantage has gone towards Lewis. He's driving very, very well at the moment. The team seems to be sort of responding to what he needs, and he is responding to what the team needs at the same time. So he's driving well, like that qualifying lap, as we spoke about. So that's great, because obviously the feeling within the team is very, very strong. It's very, very, very close. I think Lewis is very happy with the situation he's got, but it's not a done deal. For sure, it's not a done deal. There's a lot of people saying, "Oh, Lewis and Mercedes, this is going to be where they're going to take off and drive away into the distance." I don't think it's going to be that simple. It's going to be very, very tough for them, because, you know, Ferrari at a track where they were expected to do well, not on my side, but they did a good job. They weren't far behind in Spa, and that wasn't expected. So they've done a good job at the sort of the weakest tracks. So they're only going to get stronger. And once they get stronger, of course, that battle is going to be more intense. But what's also going to come into effect, maybe with the races coming up as well, was the strong performance of Red Bull in Monza, with the power unit that hasn't quite got it's not equal to the Ferrari or the Mercedes. But Ricciardo was absolutely fantastic in the race. Again, at a track that you would not have expected that Red Bull to be on fire. And he was pretty much on fire in the race, to be perfectly honest. And if we had been at the front, where he had been after qualifying, we could have had a totally different scenario, because his race pace was absolutely brilliant. So that is going to possibly, and I think we spoke about this earlier on in the season, that could come into effect with the races coming up, because they might be in the mix. They might be taking away points from Sebastian and from Lewis, and maybe we're going to have a sort of a surprise sort of race win coming from a team that you probably wouldn't have expected it to happen. So we've got some really nice ingredients coming up, and as I said, it's not a given for Lewis, and to be honest, I think Lewis is very aware of that.
Drive of the weekend for you at Monza?
Well, I think you've got to do Ricciardo in many ways, because I thought it was just brilliant after, you know, the performance he had in the qualifying himself, then getting sort of shunted to the back of the grid, then coming through in the race itself at a difficult one because of their power unit sort of issues that they have. But his overtaking was just absolutely brilliant sometimes, and I think that is the commitment that he always puts into his driving, but it's also the skill factor that I think you need to see it sometimes, and we saw it brilliantly so this weekend. So I think for me, Ricciardo, good on you.
Now, with your
mate
F1 expertise, would you be tempted, Sebastian Vettel 5-2, to go on and win the championship?
As we are at the moment, yes. I think it's...
You would be tempted?
Yeah, very much so. And I'd be tempted. Why? And I think it's because the ingredients that Ferrari have bought this season has been, I think, pretty impressive, to be honest, from where they were last year. What they have been able to do, you know, we've just gone past halfway through the season, they're still there. They're still fighting. They're still got chances of winning races. There are going to be chances coming up that they're going to be able to win more races, get those points, get themselves sort of back, maybe leading the World Championship itself, the Drivers' Championship. So from that perspective, Ferrari do seem to have really gelled together very, very well. I think the important thing and the difference we've seen this year from Ferrari is Ferrari have supplied the car for the drivers to be able to do a good job. But what the drivers have been able to supply, and mainly Sebastian, is the closeness, the understanding of what is needed from each other, and then applying it to actually when they get on the racetrack. That, from a driver's perspective, is so important and so powerful, and I think that's why we're seeing this strong Ferrari season so far. But I think that's going to continue, and I think 5-1 is a very good odd.
Let's have a look at the drivers' standings after 13 rounds then. Lewis Hamilton 238, Sebastian Vettel 235, and Valtteri Bottas at 197. Interesting for Valtteri Bottas that he's still in the mix, isn't he?
Hanging in.
Yeah, he is, isn't he though?
Yeah, he is.
You know,
again, he did a good race in Monza. You know, he was still able to sort of do some good overtaking, get himself in a position where he was close to Lewis. It never seemed as if he really attacked Lewis in any way. but he was just so consistent through the race, showing that strength that we've seen this season, where he's actually won races at the same time. So I think we said this before, he's getting better, he's getting stronger, he's getting more sort of entwined with the team itself, and those performances are there. They're not as consistent as what Lewis has been able to do, but of course it's a team that he knows very well, and everybody realistically are working for Lewis for the World Championship for sure. So he's probably second in line, absolutely, but he's still able to be sort of, you know, on the podium when he needs to do it, and that's a strength. And I think that's a strength where still, I think with the remaining races coming our way, that's going to continue.
The odds, as we've said, Sebastian Vettel 5-2 to take the championship, Lewis Hamilton 2-5, and if we look at the constructors after 6 rounds, Mercedes 4-3-5 against Ferrari 3-7-3.
Yeah,
that's what Macchioni was on about, probably, wasn't he?
I think that is one thing. I think you're probably absolutely right. Again, it's down to Kimi. I know Kimi's been under a lot of pressure. We've sort of seen some good surges of performance, then it's sort of flattened off a bit, then it's had a bit of a drop, then it's come back again. And I think that's the sort of the pressure. What's good now, of course, they've signed for an extension of his contract, so he's got another year with the team, and that's mainly because Sebastian is very happy having Kimi on board. You know, he's not a threat to him at all. No. They get on well at the same time. You know, maybe Ferrari are slightly frustrated maybe with his performances to a degree. I think Kimi himself is sometimes, you know, frustrated with the performances that he does do, or maybe doesn't do sometimes, and it's just a perfect fit for everybody because they're able to focus on one, Sebastian. Kimi is there as a good backup, and the backup is very important. It was the beginning of the season, it was just a little bit sort of slow for Kimi to get himself in the right position from the constructors' point of view. So hopefully that's something that I don't see Ferrari sort of surging back, having 1-2s, 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 and sort of getting themselves back in the constructors. That's pretty much sort of done and dusted. But I think overall, again, it's a happy team at Ferrari.
Right, let's head east to Singapore, to Marina Bay Street Circuit. Now, am I wrong in thinking that street circuits thus far have favoured Ferrari over Mercedes?
Spot on. Yes, I think it is. Yes, he's learning quick.
I'm picking it up.
And it's that thing I've been talking about.
It doesn't
as well.
say that here.
No, very good. No, be absolutely right. Yeah, I know Nico Rosberg won the race last year. I know they've had their ups and downs and sort of struggles. Mercedes there, especially a couple of years ago when Red Bull won the race and Lewis was really struggling. A little bit similar to like last year, to be honest. So there are still ingredients that this window that we talk about, of the working window, is still sort of smaller than a Ferrari, but they're able to get in that window much more consistent. But this is a totally different scenario once again, because we've got those long radius corners. I keep talking about it. Ferrari love all that, and I think that's going to come into play. You've got a man who had a good weekend, Sebastian Vettel in Monza. He's going to carry that through to, I think, a circuit that Toto Wolff has already started putting the pressure on Ferrari, saying, well, they're favourites to win this coming weekend. And I think that's just typical of a Formula One team. They're under pressure themselves to deliver. Well, let's throw it onto the other team, another contender that we're fighting against. And I think, and probably rightly so, and you're absolutely correct, I think it's just going to be a Ferrari track, because I think it just has that lovely flow and ability to sort of load the tyre in the right way to be able to sort of, one, get the tyre into its working window, but secondly to have the balance to shoot itself off of the corners as well. I think that's what we're probably going to see this weekend. And
Sebastian Vettel does have, I think he's got 4 wins out of 9.
I think that's a bit of a giveaway as well.
9 races there.
Yeah. So he's comfortable.
Yeah.
And when you're comfortable at a track that you've won before, it's always something you'll go back there and you'll sort of think, right, this one is mine. And I think that is the mindset that Sebastian will definitely have.
What does Lewis need to do then, in knowing that it's against him, knowing that Sebastian Vettel's won 4 out of 9, and at the minute as well that he's leading by 3 points?
Yep.
What does he do, knowing that his car probably doesn't favour a circuit like this?
Well, he's got to drive a heavy skin. To be honest, I think it's something. It's not a given for Ferrari at all. We still do seem to have Mercedes having the performances. You know, Russia's sort of a street circuit to a degree. Monaco obviously is, and Valtteri has done the better job at those two races. So it sort of shows that the car is not far off from the performances it needs to show when it goes to a street track. Yes, it's more humid, a lot more humid there, so you sort of think, well, that should be okay because that sort of should generate the temperature. But it's the way the track is, as I said, those sort of open radius corners. It's very difficult sometimes to get the load into the tyre if you've got an issue where I always think the Mercedes has got a very, very good front end. It's just a little bit loose at the back, and as soon as it's loose on the back, you're then a little bit tentative with sort of applying the throttle. Then you're not really loading it like a Ferrari is when it gets on the power that much earlier. And I suppose I go back to Canada actually this year in the final chicane. It's a right, a left flick, effectively, a really tight chicane. And Lewis was amazing through that final chicane in his qualifying lap, I remember. But that's not what we've got in Singapore. We haven't got those type of corners like we had in Monza. The first turn in Monza, right, left. Second chicane, left, right. All these tight corners is where that Mercedes seems to really come into its own. So we're going to Singapore where it's completely flipped around. It's the other way around. Ferrari on a circuit that really suits them. But we can see the Mercedes, if they get everything right, can be competitive. But I think we're not going to see sort of a Ferrari and a jump for the Mercedes. I think then it will only become even Stevens. So then we've got a sort of a real battle on our hands. But I think to get to even Stevens is a tougher job for that silver car and a much easier job for that red car.
Talk us through the track a bit then, Johnny, because we are talking extreme heat, aren't we, out in the east?
Can be, yeah.
Or expected to be.
Yeah.
And also lights. I mean, what difference does it make when you're driving through that? And talk us through the track.
Well, the track itself, with all the lighting that is around it, when they very first went there was some complaints that in certain parts of the circuit, I think it was turn 6 or 7, where there was like a dark patch. It was very difficult for the drivers to spot the apex of the corner. They've sort of now fixed that one, and we haven't had any complaints for I think the last 4 or 5 years. So that seems to be something that's sorted. The lights themselves are something that really the drivers don't really look at. You don't look at it when you're in the car. All you're trying to look at is obviously your braking point to the apex, to the exit, full stop. But of course you need to have the right balance in the car to give you the confidence. Even with those lights as bright as they are in Singapore, it's not natural light like we normally have completely the whole way around the circuit. There's always going to be those patches where it's slightly going to dim, then it's going to come back where the lights are positioned. But I don't think it really affects the driver in any way. You know, you go to Le Mans, the 24 hours of Le Mans, half a track is there's no lighting at all. You've got the lights on the car, but there's no lighting around the circuit at all. And your eyes adapt to it very, very quickly. You've got the simulators, the guys will be jumping in, and that again will give them a very good insight of what's going to be happening. They've got their experiences of the years gone by as well. But the nice thing about that Singapore track is that it's a flow. It's a rhythmic circuit that when you get in that rhythm, it becomes just that much easier to do. When you've got a car, you've got to fight around there with, as I said, with all those lights that are there. That makes it just a little bit more difficult and much easier to make mistakes, because it's like Monaco. You make a little error, you're going to hit the wall. And if you hit the wall, there's a chance you're either going to get a puncture or you're going to damage suspension. Then you're going to be either qualifying or out of the race. So it's brilliant, because I think it really does test the drivers to the absolute max, because there is no free get out sort of clause, because those walls don't move. Never have done, never will. And I think that's the challenge that Singapore is able to do. Then you put the heat into it. Humidity is always very different than, I don't know, Hungarian sort of really strong sun. It generates heat in a completely different way. But of course with the body, with the humidity, it sort of builds up all inside. But that's why these guys do the fitness to are able to cope with that. We're lucky it's in the night, so you haven't got that intense sunlight. It's just the humidity of Singapore itself. But they'll be able to deal with that, I think, without any problems. And again, if you get a car that gives you the rhythmic, you won't even think about the humidity.
I'm going to give the odds. I'd like you to tell me what you think, and then I'm going to ask you to come up with the poll, 1 and 2. So we've got Sebastian Vettel, 3-2. Lewis Hamilton, 2-1. Verstappen, Ricciardo and Bottas, all at 8 to 1.
Wow.
So there's one to pick out of that, and
Yeah.
Kimi Raikkonen 12 to 1. First of all, if I were to prize a pound off you, where would you be looking there?
Well, if we're going to talk about the front row, I reckon a Sebastian and Lewis front row. That would be ideal for
Yeah.
us, and I think that would be pretty ideal for them actually. I think Lewis would be very happy being on the front row. He'd be a bit frustrated probably being behind Sebastian, but Sebastian would be happy because it's sort of, you know, coming back after maybe the argumentative Marchione and the disappointment of Monza, coming back in a very, very strong fashion at a track that we expect them to do well. So the front row I think will be pretty much sort of that, so Sebastian, Lewis. The one that's going to be an interesting one for the weekend is the Red Bulls. I think I want to see the team give the reliability to Max, because if we get Max sort of having that reliability, we know how strong he's going to be. It's a track I think suits him absolutely down to the ground. You can really attack it. He's got that millimetre judgment which you need in Singapore. He's had some good races in the past, even in his days in Toro Rosso. So the Red Bulls, and especially with Ricciardo having such a strong race in Monza, going to a track that Red Bull have done very well in the past. One race is there. They're going to go there, I think, in a very positive way. The team's going to be very positive because they know the chassis seems to be working very well at the moment. We know the power unit's still not on par with the Ferrari or the Mercedes, but the chassis will work, and that is something where Ricciardo Monaco a couple of years ago was able to, you know, get very close to, you know, having a brilliant sort of race win a couple of years ago. So a street circuit, I think, at this point in the season is going to be a very interesting one for us and for the championship, because I think they could be right in the mix. I still think the front two guys who are fighting for the championship would just have that little cushion enough, but I don't think it's an absolute guarantee, but I just think they will be able to stay ahead of the Red Bull, and it could be we've got sort of a one Red Bull at least probably on that second row. I would still expect Valtteri to do, I think I would expect Valtteri to do well at the race. Out of the two Red Bulls, it's so tough because they're really, really close. I'm probably going to go for Max just because I think he's so hungry, because he hasn't had the results in recent races, well, quite a lot of races actually, where he hasn't even finished races. So I think he'll be hungry at a track he knows that he'll be able to do well. So yeah, Sebastian, Lewis, Max, Valtteri.
Excellent.
That's my first two
Thank
rows.
You. Well, you remember where you heard it, and if you fancy Max Verstappen, it's 8 to 1. We're off now for a Singapore sling, I do believe, aren't we?
Yeah. And monkey nuts. I'm going to bring you monkey nuts as well.
Yeah, monkey nuts.
Throw those all over the floor.
Obviously, it's a given. But you can check out all the latest odds at betsafe.com from practice all the way through to race day.